It is your buddy Peace and Harmony with you here today. And we're zooming in and we're focusing in on a viewer question to go a little bit more in depth in terms of the psychology of the female psychopath, an individual who comes on and exudes an incredible amount of charm. They can be very attractive, very good looking. But the key operative word here is exude, sort of a pushing out of energy that tends to emanate from this personality type. And this can be quite disarming to an individual, male or female, whomever they are targeting. It can catch people off guard. If you are not aware of this type of personality, you might be initially flattered by this personality type of a female psychopath. A female psychopath is a female who has an antisocial personality disorder. There's a change of the neural networks that wire and fire together. There is a different neurology, a different neural hormone within how they think, how they perceive, and how they approach life, relationships, business, all facets of their life. Namely, though, is the prevalence of a lack of conscience, meaning a lack of morality, a lack of integrity or ethics. And when we talk about this core and how this presents itself, largely that is an overpowering of others in their environment to get whatever it is that they want. Number one, what they might want is power over you. So to have emotional or physical power over you. You might think of it like a prowess, an agility, a charm. They might be very fast on their feet. This might be a quote-unquote positive characteristic in some respects. Business particularly, certain industries particularly, they might say that this is like a go-getter type of person, and they will rise to the ranks very quickly in their profession. But when we talk about this overpowering, there is a violation of boundaries that takes place. And unbeknownst to the naive person who has never been approached or targeted by a psychopath, there is a violation of boundaries, either very subtle or very strong. And it can be a violation of boundaries can be, number one, invading of your personal space, your physical space. Oops, their hand just slipped over here. Oops, their shoulder just slipped over here. Oops, their whole body just happened to press against you in the elevator while they're pressing a button. Oops, they tend to rub themselves on you while trying to fumble for their keys. These are very directive violation of boundaries that cause you to become alarmed, or either that or some men will take this in a very flattering way. Men who are, namely practical or, are susceptible or vulnerable to this will take this as a welcome advance if you are not careful, especially for those men who are married and go, wow, look at this. I have this lovely woman, strong, powerful, charismatic, yada, yada, status, whatever it is, and they can be quite flattered. This is the old hook, line, and sinker for these types of women, and they know that they will get what they want based on this violation of boundaries. It can be a psychological violation of boundaries. In other words, thinking that they know better than you. They are going to call you out early in the relationship and just kind of sling in that first arrow and see if they can get you to succumb to their precedence of superiority, know-how, etc. in their thought process. In other words, I know a better way of doing things. We are doing it my way. This violation of psychological boundaries, which takes people down to the unsuspecting, naive, or green observer, they might be kind of almost like in a temporary sort of panic or I would say kind of going numb process. It's kind of like the old deer in the headlights. They don't know what to do. They just stop there and then they just become rendered helpless. And then they get smacked in the head, smacked in the heart, smacked in the shoulder, smacked in the finances, they become disarmed. And the main key is that they render you unable to function or unable to kind of continue your decision-making process. It is this sort of disarming of your logic or your ability to think, feel, and decide clearly that is immediately, oftentimes gradually, if not immediately, synapsed or severed within you because of this pronouncement with which they want to diminish your boundaries and violate you and then get in and then begin the psychological hijacking, the taking over. And then, as we know, with a female psychopath, there is this ability or tendency of them to hyper arouse in order to eroticize everything, sexualize everything. And this can be done in their body language. When we talk about the female psychopath, because of the way that their neurology is set up, they have an inactivity within the areas of the brain which are responsible for morality and judgment, those sort of honoring or respect of normal, societal norms. In other words, you don't do this sort of decision like, that is wrong. That is, too risky, high risk behavior, and a tendency to get bored easily. So, very much kind of on the go. And they seem to have this psychological and physical draw to them, almost like a magnet, where a lot of people, men and women, cannot keep their eyes off of them. There's this je ne sais quoi. There's a certain energy that is exuded from them, and the energy is emitted just as if you were to look at a light bulb that is based on a certain wattage, in a certain sort of tone or type of light bulb. The female psychopath is very much in the same way. In other words, because of the neurology, it creates a different energy that emanates from their body. So a magnetic attraction, love at first sight, the piercing gaze. They seem to be sexually interested in me just by a look. People can be taken off guard by this. And so it's kind of like, I will do, for the unknowing, the unsuspecting, they fall prey to it. I will do anything for you, sort of, feeling. Yes, let's go to that park for our lunch. And then next thing you know, in the traffic, they're making advances. In public places, they're making advances. They are, by their language, they are recalibrating the emotional meaning with which you might hold on to something. So, and oftentimes the female will hypersexualize these sort of comments. And there's a very strange phenomenon that comes along when this happens. It becomes kind of like a flip of psychological perception for the viewer. So based on the way that they're pushing out their energy in this hypersexualizing and then wanting to overpower, overthrow, take control over you, whether it's in business, finances, relationships, just to get what they want. And even times it can just be for the sheer fact of the sport of it, and to take you down and destroy you. And, you could be a threat or a challenge and they just want to take you out. So, befriend you and then get you into trouble. I mean, there's a whole slew of situations which can occur. But namely, when we talk about the, and this is very interesting to note that the female psychopath, males as well, women don't tend to get identified as easily as men, because men tend to resort to more the violent behaviors, the criminal prosecution, the prison sentences, things of that nature. So women oftentimes do not get, identified in this, although they can be sheer bullies, sexual bullies, emotional bullies, financial bullies, and very violent and aggressive in this manner. And yet it can oftentimes be labeled as assertive. And so the other important thing to realize is that when it comes to the emotional meaning that a psychopath has, they do not grasp the same emotional connection to words, places, events, things, etc., sentimentality, nostalgia that most of society, i.e., 99% of society does. For example, your flag of your country might mean something to you. It might stand for liberty. It might stand for freedom. It might stand for democracy. It might stand for Betsy Ross. It might stand for whatever it is. It might stand for industry. Whatever it is unique to your country, that flag will hold what we call an abstract meaning for you. For example, freedom. That's called an abstract an abstract concept. Now, a psychopath does not really have the ability, because of the way that the neural wiring and firing of their synapses, and then these emotional centers that connect with conscious sense of right or wrong, and they are lacking in conscience, which means they are able to do things without a conscience. In other words, violate laws, boundaries, societal norms without feeling a tinge of guilt or remorse, which means regret, or, because they have zero empathy, they have zero love, they have zero emotional connection to others because of this. These are feeder problems into a whole host of other areas. So their emotional connection to words, places, events, principles, situations is completely frayed. They do not have that same moral fabric looking at situations, relationships that people do, including words, including other emotional concepts such as love, such as loyalty, such as being loyal, looking out for somebody, best interest, things of this nature. It's just not, to them it is a weakness. So there's emotional flipping of content or context with which they will look at things. So a heart doesn't mean a heart, and so this can then permeate in their language, and then you get the very sexualized language, the hypersexualization of everything. A shoe heel no longer becomes a shoe hill. It's used there. There's a certain way, a certain je ne sais quoi, a very certain kind of difficult to kind of explain, but I'm going to explain it anyway, sort of situation where, because their body is emanating from this sort of pathology of energy, they tend to kind of absorb or, take energy in, almost what people might call like a black hole, or an energy sort of transformation in the room. So you might feel like there's this energy about them in the room. And then the way that they carry themselves, the way that they position their feet, the way that they position their look, the way they position their body in the room, it tends to be kind of calibrated, calculated. These people are very, very calculated and deliberate in what they do, and how they violate. And so they look to distort and contort the meaning with which you are receiving something. For example, a woman might have this is very strange, but for those of you who understand the psychopath, you will know and you will get this. So, because most people will not understand if you have been through this brainwashing and this gaslighting, and it's very terrifying to experience if you have been, taken over by this sort of psychological hijacking and you have been drawn in. So there's this sort of contortion or distortion of meanings, and sort of there's this very pathological connection that is made between situations. For example, a woman might be holding her, and this is going to sound strange or crazy, but it is not. This is how these people work, and I'm going to describe it for you. The way that the woman might then position her body, the way it's specifically put on a desk, a chair, a seat in a meeting, a ledge outside, the way they put themselves in the glass of a restaurant, is all very calculated. And with which they will then manipulate and control. Remember, emotional manipulation, physical manipulation, psychological manipulation, spiritual manipulation is the name of the game. So they will do things as in such. And yes, we're going a little bit long today. For example, the way that they then cock their foot, and then hold their foot up, and let's say they're wearing a very large heel shoe, And then, why don't we go out for some wine? And then the way that they then time that meaning with a jiggle of their foot, I have a way to kind of show that their foot is like a cork and that we're going to be drinking a lot. This sounds strange, but what I'm describing is the inadvertent pairing of meanings with which the psychopath will exude to distort your meaning and your perception. It's a very, very odd experience. For example, the way they might hold their body in the shape of their this is very odd, but it's very esoteric, and I think that this will help you because it'll give you some eye-opening moments. They'll hold their body as if to mimic a letter in an alphabet while they're presenting something. In other words, this becomes a big M, and then they're putting something, and then the oni, they'll try to kind of influence you in these very subliminal ways. And they'll be like, oh, isn't it airy out? And then, the M will become like air, and they'll twist and contort meanings. It's a very, very odd experience. And then people say, peace and harmony, how can you talk about this? Are you lesbian? No, I am not. I've had a whole host of experience working with these people, period, end of story. And this is something I have studied, of course, as you may tell. And then there's this other, so there's this sort of psychological takeover, which leaves the person kind of stunned and rendered helpless, and then they become to be kind of entranced and kind of enter into like a trance-like state. So it becomes people are beside themselves and they're rendered helpless to kind of move or think for themselves. So the psychological hijacking is taken over. The way that they position themselves, the way that they're seated on a bench, the way that their legs are, and then the way their legs kind of capture a flower. They're using all these subtle mind tricks with which to devour their prey. And they do have a very predatory nature. You must not take this lightly. If you are able to ever understand birds of prey, animals of prey, such as a lion, they do not play around. They look to kill. They do not play to maim, although maim they may. They aim to kill. And what that means is to take you down. And I'm going to leave it at that because we're going long here. But realize that it is never a good idea to get involved with these types of people. It is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. I hope that these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.